Health information online is about as reliable as the guy in the group project who said he would definitely get the slides done on time. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Surina and I am a doctor currently training to be a surgeon. It can be so hard to know what's real and what's not when we've got so much information coming into our little screens at all times. So in this video I'm going to look at a few health trends I kept seeing pop up on the internet, and I'm going to split them into two groups. What the health being something that there is little to no evidence for and possible potential for harm, and healthier, which is something that either there is some good evidence for or it's relatively harmless and could have some benefits for some people. Starting off strong with colonic irrigation or colonic hydrotherapy. If you don't like poo, then I would look away now. Those of you who haven't looked away, you're nasty. Colonic irrigation is effectively the fine art of shoving a hose pipe up your butthole and irrigating your bowels with lots of water to wash out the contents of your bowel. The claims that are made for doing colonic irrigation on otherwise healthy adults include detoxifying the gut, cleaning it out, allowing for better digestion and even weight loss. But what does the science say? This systematic review identified 16 published manuscripts that look to see the effectiveness of colonic irrigation, with one being a latter and only 2 of them being clinical trials. They concluded that firstly, there are no good rigorous control trials of colonic cleansing to support its practice for general health promotion. And secondly, there were multiple case reports and case series that described the adverse effects or negative consequences of colonic irrigation. Adverse effects seen after colonic cleansing included bowel inflammation, bowel perforation, which is a serious surgical emergency, as well as reports of spread of infection. There was some low-quality data insinuating perhaps some benefits. This paper looked at 18 patients with irritable bowel syndrome. They had regular colonic cleansing for about 4 weeks, and there was some suggestion of improved symptoms in terms of improved abdominal pain and discomfort. But as you can see, this was an extremely small study, and so nothing that we can draw conclusions from to actually apply it to a population and offer it as a safe service. So conclusions. As someone who sees butthole problems and surgeries on a regular basis, at work that is, mind you, I truly believe that less is more. When it comes to looking after our gut, it really is all about the less invasive lifestyle factors like your diet, your sleep and your exercise, and if it is doing its job, then I would just leave it alone. It's a definite what the health for me. Speaking of gut health, another thing I've been seeing pop up more and more everywhere is this figure of eating 30 different plants a week. Claims made include that a more diverse diet equals a more diverse gut microbiome, which basically means all the bacteria living in your gut. And with a more diverse microbiome, your gut will function better, so you'll have better digestion and better immune function, both which are roles of your gut. Now, gut health as a whole is a relatively new area of science and medicine, and something I could do a whole video on separately. But now let's take a closer look at the evidence behind where this magic number of 30 came from. This study from the University of California is one of the largest studies on the human microbiome, where over 11,000 citizens in the US, UK and Australia were basically asked to send in their poo samples, and data was collected about bacteria in the poo as well as the diet content of the humans who produced it. The participants in the study were all adults within a normal BMI range and with no history of inflammatory bowel disease or any recent antibiotic use. What they found here were that participants who ate more than 30 different plants a week had a much greater range of diversity in terms of the different types of bacteria found in their gut, compared to those who ate less than 10 plants a week. In terms of whether this is beneficial for you, if we're looking at broad strokes, then yes, we know that eating more plants is good for you. There is data showing that generally eating more plant-based foods or shifting more towards a plant-based diet can have improved health outcomes in some cases, such as reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. We also know that plants are a fantastic source of fibre, and we should be aiming for about 30 grams of fibre a day, but the average UK adult fibre consumption is much lower than that, and so eating more plants can really help with that. which again is really beneficial in terms of maintaining good cardiovascular and bowel health. What we don't understand as clearly yet is what the effects of a more diverse microbiome are on us. Yes, with more diverse diet, there is more diverse colonization inside your gut, but which strains are useful and which are not, maybe this differs in different people. We don't really have that information yet, so it's difficult to draw specific conclusions about that. But what I like about this health advice is that it's all about adding more of stuff we know is good for you, and it's not about restriction in any form, which is always a bit of red flag when it comes to diet and nutrition advice online especially. This is something that I personally try and do every week, and 30 initially seems like such a big number, but actually there's so much that comes under the umbrella of plants. So it includes not just fruit and vegetables, but also nuts and seeds, legumes, herbs and spices. Once you start layering all these different things into each meal, you'll be packing in 8, 9, 10 different types of plants even in one meal, and then it's quite easy to get to that magic number 30. And so yes, although a lot of work remains to be done on the topic of the gut microbiome, I think this is a very sustainable, healthy, and quite a fun health habit to try and implement. And so for me, this would be a healthy yes. Okay, next moving on to cold plunge pools. And this is something that I personally know a lot of people who do actually. One of the doctors I was working with on my last rotation got a cold plunge pool for Christmas and claims he plunges in it every day. So I'm very interested to know what kind of benefits these people are getting from it. The benefits claimed online include improving aspects of physical health, like improving muscle recovery after exercise, supporting immune function, and mental health benefits such as improving your mood and resilience. A little bit of school time about what happens when you are exposed to cold water. Your body is working really hard to keep your internal temperature really constant at all times, at around 37 degrees Celsius. And so when you encounter external elements that are trying to sway you away from that core temperature, your body works even harder to try and keep that temperature stable and to keep your brain and organs functioning normally. This is done cleverly through a few different mechanisms. First, peripheral vasoconstriction, which means constricting of your peripheral blood vessels. Because, like I said, your body's top priority is preserving your brain and all your other internal organs. That's why you get really cold hands and feet first when you start to feel cold, because these extremities are a bit less important for the body, and so blood flow can be directed away from there and preferentially into your core. Then we have shivering thermogenesis and non-shivering thermogenesis. Thermogenesis meaning the creation of heat. Shivering, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the rapid contraction of your muscles. That rapid contraction increases your metabolic rate, and an increased metabolic rate produces heat. Non-shivering thermogenesis is the creation of heat using special fatty tissue in your body called brown adipose tissue. This is a good tissue type to generate heat for you when you need it. The fourth thing that happens when you are exposed to cold temperature is your cardiovascular response, so the effect on your heart. Your heart will increase in its heart rate, your blood pressure increases, and your respiratory rate increases as well, all in an effort to generate more heat through various mechanisms. So with that knowledge, we can start to look at whether cold immersion is good for your health. This systematic review shortlisted 104 papers looking at the health effects of voluntary exposure to cold water. It stated that actually for most of the studies, it was quite difficult to draw meaningful conclusions from because the group sizes that were tested were very small. There sometimes wasn't much diversity in the group, so only of one gender, for example, and there were lots of differences in terms of how long people were exposed to the cold water, whether it was fresh and salty water. So there were a lot of variables, which makes it difficult to draw a general conclusion from. There was suggestion from all the papers in the systematic review that cold exposure could be effective in treating chronic inflammation, reducing high cholesterol levels, and also have positive effects on stress regulation. But this paper noted that given the types of people that were usually doing cold water immersion were otherwise quite active, usually quite fit, into other mindfulness practices such as meditation and breathing exercises. There could be lots of other factors contributing to these better health outcomes, and it was difficult to prove that it was the cold water immersion that was responsible. One interesting finding that was quite constantly reflected in a lot of these papers was the benefits on mental health. Although quite stressful for the body and mind, was commonly described as a joyful and positively experienced leisure activity in terms of a feeling of achievement and increased feeling of resilience to be able to tackle other things in their life. Now, I can definitely add some very low level evidence to this with a sample size of 1. You know, I am quite proudly high maintenance, but I'm happy to get involved as well. If you want me to camp, I'll do it. If I can't shower for a couple of days, that's okay. But cold water? No, I refuse. I'm not getting in. I'm not even looking at it. Even if I am diving or snorkeling and the temperatures of the water or of the environment are not absolutely beautifully hot, then I'm wearing 2 wetsuits because I can't handle it. My body just can't handle it at all. But for some reason, a few weeks ago, I felt like I had something to prove, and I got into the seawater in Cornwall in the UK. And I've never ever entered the sea in this country because the weather is just never acceptable, no matter how hot it tries to get here. But for some reason, I felt like I had something to prove, and I got in. And bearing in mind, this beach was absolutely full of people everywhere. The sea, completely empty. Not a single soul wanted to be in that water because of how cold it was. But anyway, I got in, and it was the most painful, I think probably less than 2 minutes of my life, but it felt like an eternity. I couldn't feel my face, I couldn't feel my body, I couldn't feel anything. And I, rushed out of the water and was absolutely in shock at what had just happened. And then the elation kicked in. I was so happy. I just felt so proud of myself. And there was honestly like an actual surge of just happiness in my body. And it was really nice. Would I do it again? No, it wasn't that nice, but it was nice. And I can maybe appreciate a little bit why people do this to themselves. In terms of looking at other benefits of cold water immersion, they have done some studies looking at recovery of athletes specifically. And this paper was a meta-analysis of 28 studies looking at athlete recovery using cold water immersion versus other techniques. And it found that cold water immersion was superior to other recovery methods for recovering from muscle soreness. So possibly if you are training for something or exercising regularly, then getting in the cold pool might aid with your recovery afterwards. In terms of harms, the most obvious harm is becoming too cold, so hypothermic. And on the whole, if you're voluntarily getting into cold water, your body will let you know when it can't take anymore and it's time to get out. And prolonged immersion is probably not recommended. So probably wouldn't recommend this in populations who are higher risk of hypothermia, especially, for example, our elderly population. We also spoke earlier about the effects of cold water on our bodies and the stress it can put on our cardiovascular system with our heart rate and blood pressure all going up. So I think if you have pre-existing heart or blood pressure conditions, it may not be advisable to give this a go, but there's no documented evidence of harm. And I think on balance, although we don't have any robust evidence of all the claims that cold water therapy claims to have, I think the generalized improvement in your mental health, if this is something you enjoy doing, something you like doing, and something you notice is making you feel better, then why not? And I would say healthier. It's not for me, but I hope you enjoy. Next up, intravenous drips. Now, I thought these had had their moment and had been done and discussed and we had moved on. But then they started popping up on my social media all over again from random people on the internet and people that I knew, which was very worrying to see how much this practice had spread. And so I thought it was time to talk about it again. I gave IV drips a quick Google based on places around me that were offering it to see what exactly was being offered. And there was all sorts of concoctions being promised for all sorts of different claims. Common ones included this rehydration bag, which included this clever little combination of electrolytes, which for those of you who may be familiar with fluids in hospitals, yes, that is a bag of Hartmann's fluid, a very common fluid choice that we give patients in hospitals if they need IV fluids. Another popular one I saw popping up a lot was Myers cocktail, I don't know who Maya was, but they put in their cocktail vitamins and minerals including calcium, magnesium, and different vitamin Bs like B5, B6, and B12. And claims were made of all sorts of things, ranging from it enhancing your immune system, improving your metabolism, stress reduction, hydration boost, improved skin health, detoxification, improved general well-being. So let's have a look at the science. We'll first look at the hydration component, and then we can look at vitamins and minerals. So hydration wise, there is a lot of different recommendations about how much water we should be drinking in order to stay hydrated. The amount varies from different sources, but it's also dependent on a huge number of personal factors, such as your gender, your size, the climate you live in, the amount of physical activity you're doing. So it's not a case of one size fits all, as is often the case when it comes to health. This paper looked at over 500 healthy adults around Europe and looked at their water intake. And it linked their water intake with hydration markers in their blood and urine and determined who was hyperhydrated, euhydrated, so perfectly hydrated, and dehydrated. And they found that in the euhydrated group, females were drinking around 2.4 litres a day and males around 2.8 litres. If we look at sources in the UK such as the NHS, they recommend drinking around 8 250 ml cups of water a day, which equates to around 2 litres. So we know that roughly daily requirements will be between 2 and 3 litres, but as mentioned, it will vary on lots of factors. Generally though, as healthcare professionals, we would recommend to drink to make your urine colour a lovely light colour, more champagne and less dirty dishwater, if you know what I mean. Moving on to vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals encompass all the micronutrients, in other words, the nutrients that your body needs in very small amounts in order to maintain some very essential functions. Examples of this would be calcium from dairy products and leafy greens that your body needs to maintain bone health, or B12, a type of vitamin B which is found usually in animal products, as well as fortified non-dairy milks and cereals, which you need to maintain good health of your nervous system. And so we can get our hydration and all of these vitamin minerals through all of the things that we eat and drink. And so the question is, should we be getting it intravenously or through our veins, like these clinics claim, for better or faster absorption? Generally speaking, our digestive system is quite literally designed to absorb what we need from what we eat and drink, send it to where it's needed, and remove anything we don't need, anything that's an excess, anything that might be toxic to us, through our inbuilt wastage systems, through our pee or poop. If you're taking something intravenously directly into the vein, then you're bypassing this whole digestive system with its inbuilt mechanisms, and it's quite easy to not give yourself enough or even give yourself too much of something without your body being able to catch up. And so generally speaking, intravenous absorption does not seem to be advantageous from a physiological point of view in a otherwise healthy adult. There are very specific scenarios where intravenous replacement of nutrition or fluid would be indicated, and that is if there is some issue with the digestive system doing what it normally does, whether you've got bowel inflammation or recent bowel surgery, or you're physically not able to eat and drink as much because you are unwell, then we would consider replacing your needs through an intravenous route. There is evidence that certain micronutrients are better absorbed through other routes, so iron is sometimes prescribed intravenously and B12 intramuscularly in those patients who have proven biochemical deficiencies in these micronutrients, because we know they can be replaced more effectively through these other routes in the first instance. After that, switching back to oral replacements either through tablets or through dietary advice, because we know that's better in the long term with less adverse risks because it is less invasive. And that is a very important point to segue into the harms that these IV drip clinics might pose. In medical practice, the golden rule is to always be as minimally invasive as possible. So we will always, even in a hospital, choose to replace something orally, choose for the patient to be able to eat and drink orally if they can, before we consider anything else, whether that's feeding through a vein or feeding through a tube. This is because any type of invasive procedure carries risks. With these IV drip clinics, they are putting needles into arms, and when you're putting a foreign body into your body, there is always a risk of infection. That could be a superficial skin infection or infection spreading into the bloodstream, which can be incredibly serious and make you incredibly unwell. Moreover, when we're replacing something artificially, there is always the risk of allergic reactions to the substance. There's a risk of overdose. Because we are artificially controlling what we're putting into the body, then it is a real possibility that if you already have normal levels, you putting something on top of that could cause you to overdose. And for certain micronutrients in certain patients, this could be extremely dangerous. For example, with many electrolytes like calcium and magnesium, if you have normal levels and then we give you more to make you have too much of it, that can cause problems with your heart rhythms, which can become quite dangerous. In people who might have some pre-existing heart conditions such as heart failure, giving them more fluid or too much fluid than they need could cause them to go into fluid overload, which can cause problems with breathing and again may require having to go to hospital. What worries me in particular about these IV drips is the setting you're given them in is almost entirely devoid of any clinical or medical input. I mean, I've seen these IV bars literally set up in the middle of shopping centres with people just sitting there receiving these bags of miracle juice. And I just wonder if people do unfortunately experience any consequences of overload or overdose or infections, then what happens then? Who is monitoring that? Who is regulating that? And so there really is no evidence that these IV drips can promote health or your general well-being in otherwise generally healthy adults. Plus, they come with various risks that I've already mentioned as well. So I would definitely save your time and save your hundreds and even thousands of pounds of money and crack on with eating your varied diet, drinking to the point of champagne pee, and you'll be grand. Next, I fell into the world of placenta ingestion, or placentophagy. Placentophagy? Let me find out.
Placentophagy.
Bit American. Placentophagy. Whatever. Plus eating your placenta. Now, I don't know about you, but if and when I ever give birth to a baby, and then give birth to this clotted, bloody, congealed mess of tissue, which we call the placenta, I don't think my first thought is going to be, looks nice, let's take that home, pop it in the oven, have it for dinner. I mean, no thanks. So I googled placenta pills, and lo and behold, all of these services popped up in my local area alone, where they could make your placenta into little pills or capsules, even smoothies. And the claims they made for the benefits of this was that the contents of the placenta, so the nutrients or hormones perceived to be in it, could increase your energy levels with its iron content, promote milk supply with its prolactin content, reduce stress levels of the mother with the oxytocin content, promote maternal healing because of the stem cells and growth factors, and could even reduce risk of postpartum depression. So let's have a look at the evidence. Now, straight off the bat, there really isn't good evidence for the benefits of eating your placenta. I found this small randomized control study where they looked at 27 participants. About half, 12 of them ate their placenta, 15 had a placebo pill, and they found that there was no difference really in postpartum maternal mood or bonding or fatigue between the placenta and the non-placenta group. In the same study, they also looked at hormonal levels of the women. So in the placenta group, they found that there were small but significant differences in the hormonal profiles of women taking placenta capsules compared to those who weren't, but their dose response changes were not sufficient to result in significant hormonal differences between the groups. So yes, there were small amounts of these hormones found in the placenta, but it wasn't translating to any difference to the woman's hormonal profile. Next, looking at the systematic review in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology showed that there was no scientific evidence of any clinical benefit of placentophagy among humans, and there was no placental nutrients or hormones retained in sufficient amounts after the placenta was encapsulated that was in any way beneficial to the mother. In fact, in this review, they noted that the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention had issued a warning against eating placentas due to a case where a newborn infant developed recurrent neonatal group B strep sepsis after the mother ingested a placenta capsule containing this contaminant bacteria. And so looking at the risk versus benefit calculation, which we use for pretty much every decision we make in medicine, we know that interventions we do or medications we give can and do have side effects, But if their benefit profile is significantly more for that patient, for that condition, then it is worth giving that intervention a go, because we know the benefits outweigh the risks. When it comes to placental encapsulation or eating your placenta, it seems that there is no good evidence or no known benefits. Plus, there are also some risks that have been identified, both actual risks and theoretical risks, and so this would not be an intervention that would be recommended by any healthcare professional. And what worries me again is this is a very unregulated industry, so these companies who are handling the placenta, storing it and processing it, we don't know what conditions that's in, whether there's any risk of contaminations and degradation of the tissue, because obviously it is a live tissue that needs to be stored and handled carefully, and so that could have some adverse health effects as well. This is definitely going in the what the health bin for me. And with that, I think it's time for me to crawl out of this health hole in the internet. If you like that video, then go check out this where I deep dive into the science behind female and male surgeons, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!